Before we begin, take a deep breath. What you are about to hear is not just a story. It's a heartbeat that changed the rhythm of the world. If you believe in courage, in truth, in the power of forgiveness, then this journey is for you. Make sure to follow, like, and share, so this light can reach one more soul. Because some stories are not meant to be watched. They are meant to be felt. This is the story of Nelson Mandela. In the rolling hills of Mvezo in 1918, a child was born beneath a sky divided between hope and hardship. His mother named him Roli Lahla, meaning troublemaker, not for mischief but for destiny. The boy who would one day move nations first learned to move quietly across red soil. His father, a tribal chief, taught him honor. His homeland, bound under British rule, taught him pain. Mandela grew up between two worlds, the ancient and the imposed. In that fragile balance between pride and oppression, a seed was planted, one that would someday crack the stones of history. At Fort Hare University, Mandela discovered rebellion whispering through dusty corridors. Books spoke of freedom while guards spoke of limits. He joined a student protest and was expelled. Yet this failure became his first awakening. As he walked away from the campus gates, the sun setting behind him, he felt the spark of something larger than education. The world had drawn its first line against him, and he understood that his life would be spent crossing such lines, not out of anger, but out of duty to justice. Johannesburg was a city of contradictions. Its factories roared with progress while its streets whispered of inequality. Mandela worked as a night watchman, then as a law clerk, observing the system that treated justice as privilege. He watched white men argue in court while black men begged outside its doors. Each humiliation, each denied case, sharpened his resolve. Law became his weapon, knowledge his shield. In the flickering street lights of Johannesburg, the young clerk began transforming into a revolutionary. In the 1940s, apartheid wrapped the nation in chains. Mandela joined the African National Congress, where ideas turned into movement. He spoke of dignity, of freedom, of a future beyond color. The risk was enormous, yet the conviction was greater. Freedom is not given, he told his comrades. It is taken. Candlelit rooms became the birthplace of courage. Mandela's voice carried the rhythm of resistance, steady, patient, unbreakable. And somewhere in the crowd, South Africa began to believe. By 1961, words were no longer enough. Peaceful protests met with bullets. Mandela faced the unbearable truth. Freedom might demand fire. He co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, the Spear of the Nation, a force meant not for hate but for survival. He knew the risk. To fight oppression, he would become its target. Yet even then he spoke softly of love for his people, saying, "I am prepared to die for the ideal of equality." History listened and took him at his word. In 1962, Mandela drove through the countryside disguised as a chauffeur. The police caught him at dawn. The newspapers called him the Black Pimpernel, the man who vanished and reappeared like smoke. His capture was not the end, but the beginning of a legend. In the courtroom, he stood tall and calm, speaking not in defense, but in declaration. "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society," he said. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment. The gavel fell, and the world went silent. Yet in that silence, his ideals began to roar. Robben Island became his universe. A small cell, a thin blanket, and the endless rhythm of hammers striking stone. But within those walls, Mandela built an invisible nation. He taught fellow prisoners law and discipline. He debated politics through whispers. Even guards found themselves listening. They had caged his body, but never his mind. Outside, his name began to echo across continents. Inside, He whispered that freedom is not found in open fields, but in the strength to endure them being closed. Years passed, seasons blurred. His daughter grew up without him. His comrades were exiled or executed. Yet Mandela refused to break. He tended his hope like a fragile flame. When despair came, he remembered his people. When loneliness struck, he remembered the world beyond the sea. In the silence of his cell, he began to see forgiveness not as surrender, but as the purest form of power. Patience became his weapon, compassion, his armor. February 1990. After 27 years behind bars, the gates of Victor Verster prison opened. Mandela walked out slowly, hand in hand with Winnie. The crowd erupted. History itself seemed to exhale. He raised his fist, not in anger, but in promise. Reporters shouted questions, but he simply smiled. Freedom, he said, was not his alone. It belonged to every child, every mother, every forgotten soul who had dared to dream of tomorrow. That day, the world saw not a prisoner released, but a nation reborn. Freedom did not taste sweet at first. It carried the weight of those who never saw it. Mandela knew that true victory was not walking out of prison, but walking into forgiveness. He met his former jailers with grace. He spoke of peace, not revenge. The man who had been caged for nearly 3 decades now taught the world that power is nothing without mercy. And in that quiet strength, the people of South Africa found their reflection, scarred, but still standing. The world watched as Mandela spoke for the first time as a free man. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of generations. Our march to freedom is irreversible, he declared. In those words, people heard more than politics. They heard permission to hope again. Streets filled with songs, flags, and tears. The man who had vanished for decades now stood as the embodiment of courage. Yet even then he warned. Liberation was not the end of struggle, but the beginning of responsibility. Freedom demanded patience. South Africa trembled between chaos and rebirth. Old wounds bled beneath new laws. Mandela met anger with composure, violence with empathy. He negotiated with those who had once ordered his imprisonment. Some called him too soft, others called him saintly. He called himself a servant. To be free, he said, is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. His words became the architecture of a new nation. 1994, the year of destiny. For the first time, Black South Africans stood in line to vote. The lines stretched for miles, winding like rivers of history. Mandela cast his ballot with trembling hands, as if touching the dream his ancestors had prayed for. When the results came, the impossible became real. Nelson Mandela, prisoner, rebel, father, was now president. The cheers of the crowd were not just for him, but for the millions who had waited a lifetime to be seen. As president, Mandela faced a nation divided by centuries. Revenge was easy. Reconciliation was divine. He created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, urging both victims and oppressors to speak. We forgive, he said, not because they deserve it, but because we deserve peace. The world watched in disbelief as bitterness turned into dialogue. Through humility, he rebuilt trust. Through compassion, he rebuilt identity. For the first time, South Africa began to imagine itself whole. Mandela rejected the gray suits of politics and chose bright patterned shirts, the Madiba shirts. They were more than fashion. They were a declaration. Power, he believed, must never lose its humanity. He danced with children, smiled at reporters, and visited the poorest villages himself. He governed not from an office, but from the heart. His leadership was rhythm, not rule. And through that rhythm, he reminded the world that dignity can be worn, not imposed. Mandela's voice began to echo beyond his country's borders. Leaders who once ignored him now sought his wisdom. He spoke at the United Nations, not as a politician, but as a teacher of empathy. "We are bound together," he said, "in our desire to make the world humane." In his calm tone, nations heard conviction. He carried the dignity of Africa on his shoulders, yet his message was universal. Justice, forgiveness, equality, words that sounded like prayers, spoken by a man who had lived every syllable. In 1993, Nelson Mandela received the Nobel Peace Prize alongside F.W. de Klerk. The world applauded, but Mandela's acceptance was humble. "We do not celebrate individuals," he said. "We celebrate the human spirit that refuses to surrender." The medal was not a crown, but a mirror, reflecting the struggle of millions. As he held it, his eyes softened. Peace, he knew, was never a trophy. It was a responsibility, a promise to keep building even after the applause fades. Mandela led not through fear, but through warmth. He listened more than he spoke. In every handshake, he saw a chance for healing. His cabinet meetings were filled with laughter, even when the topics were grave. He believed that leadership meant showing people who they could become, not what they were. "A good leader," he said, "is like a shepherd. He stays behind the flock, letting the others go ahead, not realizing that all along they are being directed." His quiet power changed the rhythm of politics forever. 1995 Rugby World Cup. South Africa hosted the world. Mandela appeared wearing the jersey of the national team, once seen as a symbol of white pride. The stadium fell silent, then erupted into unity. "One team, one country," he smiled. That day, sport became a language of reconciliation. The man who had suffered division now used a game to heal a nation. When the team won, he handed them the trophy, and the world saw what forgiveness looked like when it walked. As his presidency neared its end, Mandela began to speak less of power and more of humanity. He visited hospitals, schools, orphanages, places untouched by speeches. To the poor, he gave his time. To the sick, his hand. He refused to run for another term, saying, "Leaders must know when to leave so that others may lead." In that decision, he taught the final lesson of greatness, that the truest power lies not in holding on, but in letting go with grace. After stepping down from office, Mandela did not retire from purpose. He created the Nelson Mandela Foundation, focusing on education, health, and human rights. Reporters asked if he was tired. He laughed softly and said, "When you climb one great hill, you find that there are many more." His days were filled with travel, speeches, and children's laughter. He was no longer the president of a nation. He had become the moral compass of the world. Every word he spoke carried the calm authority of a man who had already forgiven the universe. Mandela believed that words could heal deeper than medicine. His speeches were never loud, but they lingered. He spoke of youth as the architects of tomorrow. He told leaders that power without compassion was weakness. When he visited schools, he bent down to eye level with children and said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." To the young, he gave belief. To the old, he gave peace. His language was simple, but his truth was eternal. In the early 2000s, South Africa faced a devastating HIV and AIDS crisis. Mandela stepped forward again, speaking openly when others stayed silent. After losing his own son to the disease, he told the nation, "We must not hide. We must face the truth to save lives." His honesty broke taboos and opened hearts. He wore bright shirts to symbolize hope, visited hospitals, and hugged the forgotten. Through grief, he reminded humanity that silence can kill, but compassion can heal. As years passed, Mandela's steps grew slower, but his spirit remained untamed. He spoke less, smiled more. Each public appearance felt like a farewell wrapped in gratitude. People around the world traveled just to see him wave. His wrinkles were maps of endurance, every line carved by history. When asked if he feared death, he answered, "I have walked a long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter, and in that quiet humility, he showed that even legends bow gently to time." In December 2013, Nelson Mandela passed away at the age of 95. Cities fell silent. Candles burned in windows from Johannesburg to New York. Presidents wept, children sang. The world mourned not only a man, but an idea, the belief that forgiveness is stronger than hatred. His coffin, draped in the South African flag, traveled through the streets he had once walked as a rebel. The people whispered his name not in sorrow, but in promise. "Madiba," they said, "your light still guides us." After his passing, the world didn't bury Mandela, it carried him. Streets, schools, and foundations bore his name. Artists painted his smile on city walls. Writers filled pages trying to explain the calm fire behind his eyes. But his legacy was not in statues or speeches. It lived in the choices people made, to listen before judging, to forgive before fighting. Mandela had become an idea, and ideas never die. His voice still whispered through the conscience of humanity, "Be better than your anger." Across Africa, leaders invoked his name to remind their nations of unity. Young activists carried his quotes on banners. In remote villages, children learned about the man who turned prison walls into classrooms. Mandela had shown the continent that dignity was not given by colonizers but born within its people. His story became Africa's heartbeat, a reminder that resilience is a native language and freedom, once spoken, can never be silenced again. In distant countries from Asia to Europe, Mandela's message became a blueprint for peace. Protesters quoted him. Teachers taught him. Presidents claimed him as inspiration. Yet he remained, in memory, a humble shepherd of hope. "It always seems impossible until it's done," he once said. Those words crossed oceans and outlived borders. In every movement for justice that followed, from climate marches to equality protests, his echo remained, reminding humanity that courage begins with kindness. Mandela's life forces the world to ask one question: what does freedom truly mean? Is it the breaking of chains or the rebuilding of hearts? His example answered softly. Freedom is the courage to forgive without forgetting, to lead without dominating, to love without conditions. He proved that greatness is not power over others, but peace within oneself. Through him, we see that the highest form of revolution is compassion. That, he said without words, is how humanity survives its own darkness. Years after his death, Mandela still stands in spirit. Not as a monument of stone, but as a mirror to the soul of every person who dreams of justice. His story belongs to no country, no color, no creed. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told, "You can't," and dared to answer, "Watch me." In the grand theater of time, his chapter glows with quiet defiance. Because true freedom is not a moment. It is a lifetime spent becoming human again. Nelson Mandela became more than a man. He became a symbol carved into the DNA of human hope. His image appeared in classrooms, protests, and poems. For the oppressed, he was proof that endurance defeats cruelty. For the powerful, he was a mirror reminding them that leadership is service. In a world addicted to division, Mandela became the language of unity. His presence said what words could not, that love, when practiced with courage, can bend the shape of history. Long after his voice faded, his conscience kept speaking. Every injustice in the world seemed to echo his lessons. When new wars erupted, people quoted his speeches. When nations lost their moral compass, they whispered his name. Mandela had redefined what victory meant. Not domination, but harmony. He showed that true revolution begins in silence, when a person decides to be kind despite every reason not to be. His absence became a presence, filling the world with quiet accountability. Mandela's greatest message was not political, it was emotional. He proved that forgiveness is not weakness but wisdom. He taught that empathy is a weapon more powerful than fear. Across generations, his story continues to awaken something gentle inside us. The idea that we can be brave and kind at the same time. That peace is not an ideal but a daily discipline. Every act of understanding, every moment of compassion, these are the monuments he truly built. Mandela once said, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way it treats its children." Today, his words live in schools, in playgrounds, in young voices learning that change is possible. His legacy teaches that the next generation is not a continuation, but a new beginning. To every child who dreams of justice, his story says, "Your voice matters." To every teacher and parent, it whispers, "Raise hearts, not walls." In the quiet hours of reflection, Mandela's journey feels like a sacred map, one that traces the evolution of the human spirit. From anger to understanding, from struggle to peace, from imprisonment to enlightenment. His life reminds us that freedom is an inward path before it ever becomes a social one. To conquer oneself is the first revolution. And when the soul learns to forgive, it sets the body free. Mandela walked that road so humanity could follow. Time cannot contain certain souls. Mandela is one of them. His story moves like light through generations, never fading, only transforming. In every act of resistance, his rhythm beats quietly. He belongs to history, yet he exists in every moment we choose compassion over cruelty. Time tried to age him, but it failed. Because kindness does not grow old. It simply changes shape, from a man's voice to the world's conscience. Mandela never sought glory. He said, "I am not a saint, unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying." That honesty became his power. He made imperfection noble. He showed that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. The world often celebrates noise, yet his strength was quiet. Every humble gesture, a smile, a pause, a handshake, carried more force than armies. True heroism, he proved, is silent and steady. Mandela's journey reminds us that humanity is interconnected. His freedom was not his alone. It was a signal to every soul still imprisoned by prejudice. When one person stands up, 1,000 find their voice. When one forgives, 1,000,000 hearts soften. His life was the echo of our collective evolution, proof that the human spirit, when united by love, can bend reality itself. He didn't just change South Africa, he changed what it means to be human. Even now, his presence lingers like dawn after a long night. In laughter, in struggle, in hope, his essence remains. The world still faces injustice, still stumbles between greed and grace, but Mandela's light continues to guide. It reminds us that the measure of civilization is not wealth or power, but compassion. The more we care, the more we evolve. He left us no empire, no inheritance, only an invitation to keep walking toward the light he found. Mandela's greatest legacy is invisible. It lives in the human spirit's refusal to give up. He taught that the deepest prisons are not made of stone, but of hatred. And the key has always been within us. Each generation must find it again. Unlock, forgive, rebuild. His life is the evidence that resilience is contagious. That love, once awakened, cannot be silenced. He showed the world that no wall can stop a soul that has decided to be free. Mandela's life was never about perfection. It was about perseverance. He stumbled, he doubted, he failed, yet he kept walking. That is why the world believes in him. Because he showed that greatness is not being flawless, but being faithful to what is right. His story reminds us that the smallest act of integrity can outlast entire empires. He turned struggle into scripture, suffering into strength, and in doing so, he rewrote what it means to live with purpose. He taught us that we are more alike than we are different, that the heart does not recognize color, only kindness. In every culture, every religion, every nation, there lies the same desire: to be free, to be seen, to be loved. Mandela spoke that truth not with force, but with grace. His courage became a mirror, reflecting the best version of who we can be. When we look into that mirror, we no longer see him. We see ourselves, unafraid to love again. All revolutions begin inside the human heart. Mandela's battle was never just against apartheid, it was against the illusion of separation. He saw that the enemy was not a race, but the fear that divides us. His victory was not the fall of a regime, but the rise of empathy. Through him, the universe seemed to whisper, "Only when we forgive do we truly evolve. Only when we love do we truly exist." That is the truth he carried to the end. Imagine a single candle in the dark, one small flame, surrounded by centuries of shadow. That was Mandela. His light traveled across borders, through generations, illuminating everything it touched. Each time someone stands up for justice, that flame burns again. Each time someone chooses peace over revenge, it grows brighter. He may have left this world, but his light keeps moving. Not ahead of us, but within us, guiding every heart that dares to hope. The story of Nelson Mandela is the story of humanity itself, fragile yet unbreakable, wounded yet willing to heal. He began as one voice and became the echo of millions. His journey reminds us that the universe listens when a single soul chooses love over hate. One man changed his country. One heart inspired the world. And as long as compassion survives, his spirit will never fade. Because the story of a man is the echo of the universe.